Yeah, man, trust me, it was crazy. Yeah, and I told him my pee-pee was this big and... Hello? Hello? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another Lorcana video. I'm TheXploder, and apparently my pee-pee is this big. 60 cards big. I don't know what else you're trying to... I'm talking about a deck list. Because yes, recently at Locals I've been testing out the brand new Pirate Pete tech, and I've been wanting to make this deck as best as I possibly could. So far I've tested out 3 variations, and we're going to be starting off with the very first one I came up with some inspiration as well that I'm going to be showing you. Also, can Pirate Pete step up and become the greatest on the high seas? Let's find out. First things first, before we get into my deck list, there's another deck list I want to talk about that was an inspiration to where I started when building the Pirate Pete deck, and it's this, Runarn's Repeat Acklock, and I'll put a link to this down in the description below so you guys can check it out yourself. This is a very interesting, very well budgeted deck. For under $25, you've got a deck that just works and is really quirky, and I just wanted to do a clear shout out to Runarn's, because if it wasn't for his inspiration, I wouldn't have made my adaptation of this deck just to lean more into the Pirate Pete side of things, so thank you very much. Here is my list, a little bit higher in budget. It is just over $36, and it's ESPP or Emerald Steel Pirate Pete. This is the whole reason why I've been talking about my PP. Starting off, first things first, we have the brand new 1-drop Pete Pirate Scoundrel, a 1-cost 1/2 for 1, and whenever you play an action that isn't a song, you may banish a chosen item. Really handy at the moment where Sapphire is completely dominating the meta, and there's a bunch of items in play that can do very cheeky stuff. Looking at you, Sapphire Coil. So if you want a way to control the board a little bit more as early as turn 1, and get something out there that can get rid of Porpsicles, get rid of Fortispheres, get rid of Sapphire Coils, get rid of Dimes, and all you need to do is play an action that isn't a song, Pete's your man. I'm also running the 1-cost Captain Hook Forceful Duelist, one of my personal favourite 1-drops in Steel. He has Challenger 2, and effectively you put him out, he counts as a pirate, he counts as a captain as well, which is useful for other cards in the deck, and if you bop into something, it's now a 3/2, not a 1/2. Solid card. And we're also running a brand new Donald Duck. Donald Duck Lively Pirate. 2-cost uninkable 1/1 for 2 lore. And whenever this character is challenged, you may return an action card that isn't a song card from your discard to your hand. Bearing in mind, it is when he is challenged, not when he's banished. So if your opponent declares a challenge into Donald directly, you get your action back from the banish pile before the challenge completes. And the idea is, if you can keep Donald alive that little bit longer with resist, with buffing up his defenses, which we can do in this deck, chances are you might be able to get more than one action out of him while he stays on the board. If you can't, it's not a big problem. He's a pirate for quests for 2 as early as turn 3. That's really nice. On top of that, we also have a couple of copies of Morph, Space Goo. We're running a couple of shift characters in here, and Morph just helps us get to those shift characters without necessarily having the required shift target. We're also running 2 copies of Stitch, Little Trickster, a 2-cost 1/3 for 1 lore, and if you pay 1 ink, this character gets +1 attack this turn. Anyone that has played Magic the Gathering in the past will know this ability to be fire breathing, where you effectively just gain more power. It's not a once only either, so if you attack and let's say you have 3 ink left going but you have no other use for, you can buff him up 3 times and suddenly he turns into a 4/3 but bops into whatever you need him to. He's mostly here because of the shift stitch that we are running, which we'll get into a little bit later on. And we're also running 4 copies of Mr. Smee Bumbling Mate. He's one of the best 2-drops in the entire game. Quest for 2, counts as a pirate, takes 1 damage at the start of, the end of your turn if he is exerted, but luckily we are running a 1-drop Captain Hook, so the chances of that happening do lower, and quite frankly, he's just one of the best cards, you go run it. We're also running 4 copies of Donald Duck First Mate for 3-cost inkable 2/3 for 1, and while I have Captain in play, we get +2 lore on this Donald, so this Donald's able to quest for 3. So if you're on curve, you could end up with Captain Hook turn 1, Smee turn 2, Donald Duck first mate turn 3, and as long as Captain Hook stays alive by the time it's turn 4, that means Donald Duck quests for 3, Mr. Smee quests for 2, heck, if you want to, you can quest with Captain Hook for 1, and that is a 3, 4, 5, 6 lore play with just 3 cards on board. Pretty darn great, very reliable, I really like him, and Captain Hook isn't the only captain in the deck, so chances are you're going to be able to quest for 3 with Donald consistently. And one of the other new cards is the brand new dual color Mr. Smee Efficient Captain, a 3-cost uninkable emerald and steel 3/3 for 1, and whenever you play an action that isn't a song, you may ready chosen pirate character. The key thing to note here, it readies any chosen pirate, including himself, and it doesn't stop them from singing again, questing again, attacking again, which gives you full access to blatantly go nuts with this tech. So let's say all you have out is Mr. Smee and Donald Duck First Mate. Donald Duck First Mate quest for 3 because Mr. Smee counts as a captain. You play an action that isn't a song, Mr. Smee triggers, we ready Donald Duck quests again for 3, you play another very cheap action that isn't a song, ready up the Donald again, do it again. Mr. Smee plus Donald or plus Smee can just make this engine go absolutely insane, and you can end up getting a bunch of lore out of nowhere, making your opponent go whoa 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 whoa, and that's the point. We also have 4 copies of Pete Games Referee. Not just is he an ideal shift target for the bigger Pete, he shuts down what your opponent is planning on doing. Songs are powerful, I know it, you know it, and the best thing we can do is shut down the songs, shut down the actions, and just stop your opponent from making particular plays on their turn. We're also running 4 copies of the Iago Fake Flamingo, a 4-cost 2/4 for 1, has evasive, and whenever this character quests, you may pay 2 less for the next action you play this turn. We're running with tech that relies on playing actions that isn't songs, so we're not going to be really singing anything, so what we need to do is make our actions either free or definitely cheaper, and this Iago does help. After that, we are running 3 copies of the 4-drop Stitch Alien Buccaneer, who counts as another pirate for us. He is a 3/4 for 2 lore, shift 3 so he can shift onto Stitch or more for a 3 cost, and whenever you play this character, if you use shift to play him, you may put an action card from your discard on top of your deck. So it works alongside Donald Duck, so Donald Duck will get it back into your hand, and Stitch will get it back into your deck, so at least you'll be able to rinse and repeat your actions as best as you possibly can. And last but not least, the reason why I had to build this deck in the first place, Pete Space Pirate. I love him to pieces. 6-cost inkable 5/5 for 2 lore, a shift 4 if we already have a Pete out or if we have our morph out, and Frightful Scheme. While this character is exerted, opposing characters can't exert for songs or to sing songs, and your pirate characters gain resist +1. That includes himself. So, bearing in mind, as long as Pete is exerted, your pirates have resist +1, and on top of all that, your opponents can't use their characters to sing songs, which means they're going to have to pay the raw cost of songs in order to play them and get their full effects, which can be a huge detriment to particular decks, which is absolutely fantastic. And again, combine this Pete with something like Smee, and now you play an action, you ready Pete, you quest for 2, and as long as you end the turn with Pete sideways, Pete has resist +1, Mr. Smee has resist +1, and it just shuts down the board. Talk about a brilliant card. After that, let's go into our actions. We're running 14 actions that are not songs in order to trigger Donald, Mr. Smee, and Pete Tech as best as we possibly can. So we have 1 copy of Fire the Cannons. We're only running with 1, just in case we need it. We might not need it all the time. Then we're running 2 copies of Hypnotic Deduction. This allows you to draw 3 cards and put 2 back onto the top of your deck in any order. It's an interesting card that I quite like. It helps it so that if you have cards in your hand that's a little bit later in the game, or cards that, depending on your matchup, just aren't viable right now. You can at least draw some cards and put 2 cards in your hand back on the top of your deck that you can just use later on, or potentially use as ink later on, or at least plan your turns ahead of time, ready for what you want to do next. It's a cool card that I don't think people will see coming a lot of the time, and because it's an action, triggers a lot of stuff. I'm also running 3 copies of Baboom, being able to simply deal damage like fire the cannons. The trick and reason why we're playing more, we can ink it if we just don't need it. We're also running 3 copies of Hypnotize, because even though we're not doing a lot of discarding tech, being able to discard our opponent's hand when we can is just a net positive, and being able to draw a card also will benefit us, because as you can imagine, with this color combination, don't have a lot of ways to draw cards in general, so at least this is something we can do. We're also running 3 copies of Smash. Smash is still a perfectly viable action because it's an action as well. It will trigger Smee, being able to ready our pirates and be able to quest for big lore, deal 3 damage to something, get it off the board, everything's good to go. Do I need to say anything else? You smash. And as a quirky tech that's a little bit expensive in this deck, we're running 2 copies of Unfortunate Situation. Main reason for this is to get behind Ward. Ward is still a problem. Ward is still a really big deal to have to contend against, and Unfortunate Situation will help. The bad side of Unfortunate Situation is that it is very situational and you need to time it right. If you mistime it, your opponent would just pick Unfortunate Situation onto one of their characters they really don't care about, and it will not go onto those Ward characters you want this to go on. There's only 2 copies of it because we're only going to be using this in particular situations, in particular matchups. Otherwise, it could just go into your inkwell. On top of those actions, we are running 5 songs that won't trigger the tech of the deck, but are going to be useful to help us in certain scenarios and keep our consistencies going. We are running 3 copies of Let the Storm Rage On. Quite frankly, if you're running Steel and you're not running at least 3 versions of Let the Storm Rage On, you're doing yourself a bit of disservice. 2 damage like Fire the Cannons and Baboom, and you get a card draw and you can sing it. Fantastic. And we're also running 2 copies of And Then Along Came Zeus, being able to sing, deal 5 damage to a pesky character or a pesky location, just helps control the board again. We do have ways to relatively make this easy to sing. I mean, if push came to shove, Iago can sing it if you're not too worried about getting an action for cheap this turn. Stitch can just put it back onto the top of your deck later on, because Stitch doesn't rely on the action card being an action that isn't a song. It can just be any action. So 2 copies of this is all we need, and it does help out. And last but not least, I'm also running 2 copies of Hidden Cove for Tranquil Haven for 1 cost inkable location with 6 willpower, and characters get +1 attack, +1 defense while they're here. Simple and clean, it's very good, it helps us out, definitely helps out Lively Pirate to stay out a little bit longer and have a 2/2 stat block, which is a lot more scary to go into in comparison to a 1/1 stat block. Combine it with Big Space Pirate Pete, and now Pirate Pete becomes a 6/6, and when turned sideways is now a resist +1, and again, if we have Pirate Pete mixed together with Lively Pirate Donald, now Lively Pirate Donald in the Cove will count as a 2/2 with resist 1, which makes him even harder to get rid of, which is a huge threat. Big situational play, do not get me wrong, and that's a lot of cards to make that engine go burr, but the fact that you can do that just with Cove is ace. Now that's the deck list in general, and this was version 1 of a deck, so let me explain why version 1 did not do as well and I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. The main reason is this: being able to play actions that aren't songs hinders you in the long run. And because of that, you're not going to be running a lot of songs. You can't opt in to a lot of copies of even like Strength of a Raging Fire if you want to go that way, which is another fantastic Steel song. You're not going to be looking at A Whole New World, which is another fantastic Steel song. Grab Your Swords. A lot of these really strong Steel song plays that you could put into this deck immediately get nulled out, which is a big detriment. On top of that, because you're relying on actions that aren't songs, there aren't a lot of actions that aren't songs that also help you draw cards. The one I would immediately put in, and did put in after playing this deck initially, was the 1-drop Emerald Improvise card that does buff your characters by 1 attack and allow you to draw a card also. That helps out the entire engine so freaking much. Because it's an action that doesn't count as a song, it will help trigger Mr. Smee Efficient Captain a heck of a lot more. Also, I think that's probably one of the best single cost low action cards in Emerald that in this deck is basically an essential. On top of that, there are just some cards in this version that just didn't hit. Unfortunate situation was just unfortunately never used. It never came up, or if it didn't come up or was never used, it was always going into the inkwell. It's a wasted slot when, quite frankly, we could up Baboom to 4, we could up Smash to 4, we could put in Improvise. Hell, I could have even upped Hypnotize to 4. But even Hypnotize isn't that great because it's just a little bit too expensive. You want to keep your actions around for 1 to 2 cost range. Any higher really makes the deck struggle. And even with tech like Iago's slow. So yeah, you get that quest for 1 and you pay 2 less. So now Hypnotic Deduction is free, Baboom's free, Fire the Cannons is free, Hypnotize is 1, Situation is 2, Smash is 1. And that sounds good on paper, but in practice Iago's slow, and because you want to rely on Iago by turn 4 to lower your action costs, it's not worth it. When you'll be better off just playing a lot more low cost actions in the first place that you don't need to reduce, but you're happy to spend 1 to 2 ink on because it just makes sense. The other thing that didn't quite work in this deck, Morph didn't. As much as I have a couple of shift characters in here, it's a wasted slot. I've only got 2 shift characters, so it's not worth Morph being played. If I had more shift characters, it would be more viable to add in Morph. On top of that, Stitch Little Trickster and Stitch Alien Buccaneer more specifically, wasted. Didn't really work out as well as I thought. And on top of that, I want the actions in my hand. Putting them on the top of my deck can actually screw me over, especially if I'm ink starved, if I'm not getting the cards I really need, and if my discard doesn't have the actions I want to put on the top of my deck that late in the game. I need them early on. And Buccaneer just doesn't help. Yes, he counts as a pirate, but quite frankly, there are better pirates on the 4-drops that are better than Stitch Buccaneer, and it just didn't work out. So you'll see in version 2, a bunch of changes were made, but even with those changes in mind, for a budget deck with some quirky plays that can be done, I still recommend trying this out. It's not the best deck in the world, by all means, but it's fun. And if anything else, I'm a huge advocate for fun in the game of Lorcana. Give this a try, see what you think. But with that being said, what are your thoughts on my first iteration of the PP deck? Do you think my PP energy is quite low, or do you think it's pretty darn huge? Let me know your thoughts over in the comments section below. Feel free to hit me up on my socials as well for any more details about the PP decks, or any of your thoughts on PP or Lorcana in general. And while you're down there, and whilst you're going through my socials, why don't you consider following, subscribing, joining in on the big community action fun times that happens here on the channel and everywhere else, so you don't miss out on any other action. Like I said, this is version 1 of the deck. I've got 2 more versions of this deck that play in their own unique ways that I think you'll be interested in, so keep an eye out for those 2 coming soon. And in the meantime, I want you to have a good day, and I'll be seeing you in the next video. Until then, stay safe, stay awesome, but most importantly, stay explosive. And I'll be seeing you guys next time. I really need to pace myself when it comes to talking about PP energy on YouTube. If I go too hard, then YouTube's going to be upset. And one thing for me in particular, sometimes going hard is good, but sometimes you need to go in softly. Oh my god, this is one big innuendo.